From the RSNA, this is the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. My name is Paul Yee, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast.
And my name is Ali Tijani, and I'm a radiologist and co-host of the podcast. Each month, we dive into the hottest topics in radiology AI and talk with leading experts, thought leaders, and movers and shakers in the field.
Hey everyone, today on the Radiology AI podcast, we are very excited to welcome Dr. John Stewart, MD, PhD. Dr. Stewart is a radiologist based in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and an entrepreneur as well. He's the creator of a software product called rScriptor. Today, we'll dive into his insights on entrepreneurship in radiology and how to turn your side project into a business. Dr. Stewart, thanks so much for joining us today. It's so great to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
I was really drawn to your story because here at Radiology AI, we know that there are a lot of radiologists like you with technical skills. We know that there are medical students, residents, fellows, and attendings who come from engineering backgrounds, science backgrounds, business backgrounds, where they have an idea for a product but don't know how to get that idea off the ground. Today, I'd love to dive into your story with entrepreneurship and how you created rScriptor. So tell us a little bit about the history behind rScriptor and how you first created it.
Well, it kind of started back when I was in private practice. So when I started private practice, we were just switching from doing transcriptionists over to dictating into voice recognition. And, at that time, it wasn't an option. The hospital said, you're going to voice recognition because we're getting rid of our transcriptionists. So you guys figure it out. And so we took a big hit in productivity when we had to do that. And I had developed a lot of software. I had worked at NASA for a couple of years developing software before I started medical school. And then when I did the MD PhD, it was all software development. And then even after, I was doing some software development. So I knew a lot about software and how to write software. And the thing that was frustrating to me was like, I'm thinking to myself, software should not decrease your productivity. We should be increasing our productivity with software, not decreasing it. And this is decreasing my productivity. So just kind of was mulling around the idea of what can we do to fix this, issue. And then I discovered, well, the dictation software itself has some stuff in there that's supposed to be able to let me dictate any finding and put it into the report where it belongs. And then I tried it and it was miserable. It just didn't work at all. And that got me thinking, like, why doesn't it work? We should be able to make it work. I was in private practice. Everybody got paid the same. Didn't matter if you were more productive than everybody else. I was typically one of the more productive people, but we all got paid the same. So there's not a whole lot of incentive to develop anything to dictate faster. But then I decided to start doing teleradiology after about 7 years in private practice. And when I started that, then there was incentive to be more productive. You still had to create and I still wanted to create really high quality reports. And I'd never wanted somebody to look at my report and say that's not up to standards. So I wanted to create really great reports, but I wanted to do it efficiently. I said, well, I got to write this software now. So I started developing the software to do it. And I really didn't know how well it would work. And the intention was just for me to use it. I never intended anybody else to use it. And I was amazed at how well once I got it working, how well it worked to the point that I was like, I don't think I could go back to the old way of doing things, of dictating the old way. This is just much more efficient, being able to dictate things in a random order and have them get put into the report for me. So that's kind of how the whole thing started. It was just a way for me to be more productive and to still create really high quality reports without compromising anything regarding the report.
So you have this product, you've been working on this for maybe a few weeks, a few months.
Before I really got it working well, I probably had written it for 4 or 5 months.
So, you're making iterations to this, you're kind of testing it out yourself. When did you think that, okay, maybe other people would be interested in using this?
That kind of happened by accident as well. Like I never planned on, like I said, I wrote it for myself really to use. And then one night I was having trouble with my workstation and one of the IT folks was on my computer. And while he was messing around in the background, I was dictating reports and I was using my software that I wrote. And he noticed what I was doing and he was like, what software are you using there? And I said, well, it's just something I wrote to help me, dictate cases and stuff. And he ended up watching for a bit, and then he talked to the administration at the teleradiology practice who said they wanted to see it as well. And so that company was VRAD at the time. They asked me to demo to them. I demoed it to them, and then I demoed it to them again, and then I demoed it to them again. I did it literally 9 times before they actually had and that's not an exaggeration, it was 9 times I demoed it to them. And finally, they had 2 of their medical directors use it over a weekend, and everything changed after they tried it. And the 2 guys who used it, one of them said, "I just dictated 30% more cases than I've ever dictated before over a weekend." And he said, "This is the real deal. This is something we should really look at." And so we ended up licensing it to them, and they ended up actually rolling it out to every single radiologist in the practice, over the course of 6 months. So that's how it came to be, it was just that the demand was what caused the company to be formed. So once it was becoming clear that this was going to be a product that I could license, then I formed a company, and I had done that before. I had other small companies I'd started before. And so I knew how to start a company. I knew what you had to do. And I had a lawyer. And so I had my lawyer do a license agreement, which of course you had to negotiate with BRAD over and over again. And so we had one customer who was, I think when we started, it was 350 radiologists right off the bat. So we had a very large customer right from the start. And then, it just kept going from there, more and more, mainly teleradiology practices wanting to license it. And now one of our biggest segments are individual radiologists who are licensing our scriptor for their own use.
My understanding is that a lot of times in business, one of the hardest things is going from 0 customers to 1. So that's a little bit about how you got your first customer. How about the next few customers after that?
Our company has grown mostly through word of mouth. So what we found is when you try to approach cold call effectively businesses, that's doesn't work real well in radiology, or at least medical sales. I think it's a little bit challenging. What we found was more effective is word of mouth sales. So people would say, "Hey, we heard about your software," or people from VRAD would go to another practice and they'd say, "I want to keep using this software." And then they would learn about it, and then they would become a customer. And that's kind of how we grew, like organically that way. Now with the advent of social media, we try to do a lot of social media, informative type posts about what our software can do, what its capabilities are, show it, demonstrate it online. And then people contact us and say, "Can I try it?" And we have a method to give them free trials or do demos or whatever. So we found it much more effective to have, and I think for obvious reasons, to have people contact us. Then we know they're interested, and we can, we start the sales process that way.
We talked a little bit about the sales process. Let's say that you have someone who's interested in using your product. What does it look like to go from someone who might be interested to someone who's ultimately using your product and happy with it? Do you feel like it takes maybe 1 call, 2 phone calls, Zoom calls? Like how much is kind of involved in the process of going from interest to, sales?
That's really a function of how big the organization is. So, for large teleradiology practices, the sales process can be very long. It can be, several months. And it's basically, they have to start with a core group of what we would call champions, or the people who want to use it. And then they have to give their feedback. And then that feedback goes to the administration. So it's a long process, from demo to actually getting a license signed for them. Obviously, for small practices or for individual radiologists, it's very simple. They basically, we give them a trial. We have online videos to show them how to use the software, or we offer a demo. We can demo it and explain how to use it to them. And once they use it, they usually within a shift or two, whether this is right for you or not right for you. And they say, "Yeah, I like it. I want to use it. How do I license it?" And we give them the information that we need in order to get it licensed.
How do you stay organized with all the different people you're talking to and like a Rolodex of different potential clients and interested customers? Like, is that something that requires like a Google spreadsheet or some other sort of system?
Yeah, again, well, most of the time we're being contacted about potential licensees. So basically, what typically I've seen is usually within a month, we're going to be entirely through the sales process. We're either through it and they said they're not interested, or we're through it and they licensed it. Because it's just software and it's really easy to use software and it's pretty straightforward, they'll know within a shift or two whether this is something they want to use. And so after that month, if they don't want to license it, we don't bother them again. And if they do want to license it, then they're in our, then they're in our system and we have all their data, on our server and stuff that to basically keep track of them and be able to support them in whatever they need.
Can we pivot and talk a little bit more about sort of the implementation of software? So, how difficult is it to get software installed at a radiology practice? Like, how do you sort of go about navigating that?
Yeah, so it used to be a lot easier than it is now to do that. And so when I first started, we first started in 2013. And so in 13, the security issues were not as severe, or at least maybe not as addressed as heavily as they are now. Now there's a lot of documentation. If you want to get your software into a hospital, there's a lot of documentation that you have to provide, and we provide that to the hospital systems, security documents, workflow, everything that they require, privacy documents, all of that information that's required. We have a end user license agreement, all of these things. So you have to put together all that data. There are consultants that you can use to help you get that data together, but the hospitals are going to require all that from you if you want to get your software in the hospital. Now, that's for software that's installed. If you have cloud-based software, that has different criteria. If you have software that has protected health information, PHI, in it, that is going to require a whole new set of requirements as well. So all of those things factor into the implementation. It's also different if you're trying to put it in a hospital where the security measures are high versus trying to put it in a teleradiology practice or individual radiologists working out of their home where the requirements are low. So it just depends on the organization. But obviously, if you're trying to sell to hospitals, you're going to have to meet the highest level security requirements that there are. This also factors into the software development. So we developed our software in a way that we don't have PHI in our software. And that seems counterintuitive. How do you have radiology software that doesn't have PHI in it? And the reason is that the way that we do that is we interact only with the dictation itself. If you're a radiologist and you dictate a report, you know that you're not dictating the patient's name, you're not dictating their medical record number. That stuff is in the dictation software itself, but it's not part of your dictation. So we only very carefully and by design interact with just the dictated text. We don't care about any of the other information. We don't want to access it, and we don't access that information. So by doing that and designing the software that way, it's allowed us to be much more secure than other similar software to ours, where they're accessing medical record numbers, they're tracking, they're transmitting patient data. We don't do any of that. We basically let the dictation software manage all of the protected health information. We only deal with the text of the report. We don't have BAA agreements with hospitals or radiology practices. Those apply to software companies that are dealing with PHI, and we don't deal with PHI, so the BAA doesn't apply to us.
Thanks for bringing up the BAA. My understanding is that the BAA, or it's like a business associate agreement, a form that a lot of hospitals require if you're going to handle their PHI, and it basically assures that you're going to handle it responsibly and in accordance with different HIPAA.
Yeah, the BAA is absolutely necessary legal document. When you read the BAA, the whole thing is filled with PHI, HIPAA requirements, all that. And it just simply doesn't apply. If you have software that doesn't have any PHI in it, that BAA agreement doesn't make sense.
And another concept that can apply sometimes is with the FDA. So my understanding is that if your software is looking at images and it's going to make a diagnosis based on those images, then you may need certification.
Yeah, the FDA criteria are very clear in regards to lots of software, including the radiology reporting software like ours. And radiology reporting software like rScriptor is exempt from FDA clearance. And the main reason is because there's no real risk of our software any more than there's risk from dictation software. Both software, our software and dictation software itself could make mistakes. Like, you dictate a report, words come out wrong in the text. The reason why it's safe is because the radiologist is in charge of verifying that report before it's signed. So the radiologist is always in full control over the contents of that report. Never is a report signed without a radiologist reviewing that first. And for that reason, it's FDA exempt, this type of software. And that makes our life, again, much easier because we don't have to go through all the FDA requirements that, if you're going to make a device or you're going to make an AI algorithm that's supposed to find particular things in an image, those are going to require FDA clearance.
It's another follow-up question with implementation. So when you are going through the process of installing rScriptor, how much of your time would you say is spent sort of on that? And how difficult is it to do that? How many people are typically involved in that?
Again, you have to think about these things as you're designing the software. Thinking about them after the fact is a mistake. And it's a mistake I've seen lots of companies make where you've probably been to a conference like myself or RSNA or somewhere over the last 10 years. I've actually seen some amazing software, AI related, finding certain things in images or helping radiologists find things in images. And then you ask them, well, how is this integrated into the hospital system? And they have no answer. You can create great software. If you haven't thought about how you're going to implement that or integrate that into the hospital or into the workflow of the radiologist, then your software is not going to go anywhere. And so our software, so we obviously have thought about that. And so the option when we first started is what most people do and what I did not do, but most software companies will get the API of the dictation software and integrate with the API of the dictation software because our software works with dictation software. It doesn't replace it. It works with your existing software. I did not want to do that because you have to basically have a different version of your software or at least different libraries within your software for every single dictation, and not only every single dictation company, but every version of every dictation software. That was just impractical. And so I came up with the idea of, well, let's integrate our software with the dictation software through just Windows copy paste. I'll copy the dictated text to the clipboard, rewrite it in final report form, and paste it right back into the dictation software. So by doing that, our software integrates with any software because they all allow copy paste. So I didn't have to deal with all these different API applications and so forth. So we actually have a short video that we created that basically describes this is how you install the software. This is how you set up your dictation software so it'll work with rScriptor. It's a 6-minute video that many of the radiologists just follow the instructions themselves. So the installation and integration to the hospitals or the radiology practices voice recognition software is trivial. I mean, it's literally it's a 5-minute process. So, and it doesn't require myself or anybody else to help unless they run into a problem. And then we'll help them. But 90% of the time, they just install it themselves and just start demoing it themselves. Even to the point that we decided to create a button on our website that says free trial, where you don't even need to talk to a salesperson. You don't need to talk to anybody. You can download the software. We give you instructions, that little video to install it, and they just start using it and trying it out. They never have to speak to a single person at our company.
Yeah, I haven't really heard of anyone doing that. I mean, my understanding is that a lot of software in this space requires like lots of people to set up, and it can be pretty cumbersome to do all of that, the implementation.
I always think in terms of what do I want? And ideally, I don't want to speak to a salesperson. I mean, quite frankly, I just want to try the software. If it works good, then I'll license it. And that's kind of our mentality is I always, and really with the software in general, like new features and everything, I'm mostly thinking about what do I want? And so far that has been pretty successful because usually what I want is what other radiologists want too. I'm not unique in the things that I want. Everybody wants the same stuff. And that applies to the software design, that applies to the sales, to marketing. I don't want to be mass emailed from companies. And so we don't do that. I want to be charged the same amount that every other radiologist is. I don't want to have to negotiate with you about pricing. We don't do that. We post our prices right on our website so everybody can see what it costs and everybody can verify they're getting charged the same as everybody else. So I've always focused on what do I want? And I've kind of done the same thing for the company to make it what everybody else wants to. And that seems to have been successful.
All right, Dr. Stewart. So let's say that you are a medical student, a resident, attending who has an idea for some cool radiologic software product, but no prototype. What can you do from there? How would you advise them sort of to get started?
Well, it's really going to depend on whether you're going to be the software developer or whether you need to hire software developers. If you're going to be the software developer, it's just going to cost your time. Time is money, but when it's your own time, it's really not money. It's just time you could be spending doing other things. But you basically can write the software yourself and it doesn't cost you a thing. If you need to hire somebody to do it, then obviously you're going to have to come up with some money or get some investors and kind of go that route. So that kind of just depends on your situation. What's interesting now is that AI has been able to help quite a bit in writing software. And I've been amazed at how much help it is to developing code. So, I don't think you can be a non-programmer and use AI to write code and think you're going to come up with an application that's going to be worthwhile, at least not yet. But it will greatly accelerate your ability to develop software over what was possible just even 2 years ago. It's been amazing how much faster it is to develop code now with AI helping you write a lot of the, core functions, and then typically you have to debug it, but it just still saves immense amounts of time. So it just depends on your situation and whether you obviously have to have some software and understanding regardless. But if you can write it yourself, then that's going to be a very inexpensive way to develop some new product.
But yeah, I've been really impressed with ChatGPT for the record, just with, certainly things like setting up a basic website and doing like design for a website. I think it's really amazing.
I write in several different languages depending on what I'm trying to do. And, the syntax is different in every language. And sometimes you're using the syntax of another programming language and don't realize it. And then you're like, ChatGPT or any of these Cursor or any of these other programs, like, what am I doing wrong here? And it says, oh, you're doing this. You go, oh, that's right. I got to do it this way. It can't write it like I haven't seen it be able to write an entire program, although people describe that. But I have given it, I give it a function at a time. I say, here, write this function for me. And then sometimes the logic's wrong or there's a bug and I have to fix it. But it still saves me a huge amount of time and not having to, literally type all of that text to make that code run.
Going back to entrepreneurship, you'd mentioned possibly raising money if maybe you have an idea but no software sort of prototype. Do you need to raise money to start a company? And how did you approach thinking?
Yeah, again, I was in a little different situation where I had the radiology knowledge that was necessary for a radiology product. I had the software development background. I was an engineer undergrad in graduate school. So that was kind of a problem solving major where you're always trying to solve problems. I was very lucky in my background was the right background to develop a radiology product. So it just depends on how much of that you have. You know, some people have some of that, some people have all of it. It just depends on what part you have to do it. Most investors, and this is something I learned before in another company I was involved in a startup, is most investors don't want to invest in something that does not exist. So if you have an idea and no products, you're going to have a really hard time getting anybody interested. You have to have a product. Most of them want you have a product and sales before you'll get an angel investor interested. So that's pretty far down the path of, product development. Even, at one time on a startup I was doing a lot of 3D modeling from anatomy, from CT scans and doing computer-aided diagnosis back before AI was available. And we were writing all that, or I had written all that code, and we tried to develop a software, develop a company around that. And I went to several angel investor meetings and presented, and the first thing they'd ask is how many sales you have. And we say, well, no, this is pre-sale. And then they just dropped out. They wanted to see that it was a product that was going to sell. And then they were interested, but nobody's interested in pre-sale. It's very hard to sell something pre-sale where you haven't even made a sale yet of the software. So that's been my experience is you really have to go down the path of develop the software, get interest, ideally get some sales, then go to an investors and then they'll be giving you money if they see that this thing's selling.
What do you think is the hardest thing about running a business?
I think one of the hardest things is, you do a lot of experimenting. You try this, what's the effect? Does it work? And sometimes you get disappointed. You think, oh, this is a great idea and this will get us sales, and you try it and it doesn't do anything at all. So you have to be a little bit thick-skinned, and realize that you're going to fail a lot as you go along through the process. You have to be ready to try again and try something else and be creative in order to be successful. I also think that there's a lot of misconceptions about starting a business. So the biggest ones are that you have to have a bunch of money, a bunch of investors, a bunch of staff, a bunch of developers. You don't need any of that stuff. You just have to be willing to jump in and do whatever needs to be done to get the company going. And, at first I was of that thinking, okay, I need to hire this person, I need to hire that. Eventually I realized I came to a completely different attitude is that now I only hire somebody if I can't do the thing myself. So if I either don't have time or don't have the expertise, then I'll hire somebody. But I don't hire somebody just because people say, oh, well, you don't have a CFO, you need to hire a CFO. Well, you don't have a this, you don't have that. I don't do that anymore. I only hire people if I see that there's a need and that I think that that person is going to help me. Otherwise, I figure it out and I do it myself.
That kind of answers the question we're going to ask next. But so you have multiple degrees, including an MD, PhD. Did you ever think about getting an MBA? Do you ever kind of have a sense of imposter syndrome, maybe when it comes to running a business?
I had thought about getting an MBA when I was in I had just finished my master's in engineering. I had considered getting an MBA then. I had just started working at NASA at that time. But I really liked science and I liked engineering. I was an engineer there. And so I really wanted to kind of go down that road, stay in the scientific area. And then I got really interested in, I wanted to kind of do something where I could help people and, use my, engineering or my abilities to help people. And that kind of got me thinking about medical school, where I had never even thought about medical school before that time. And that's kind of how it evolved. But I did at one time think about the MBA part because I always was I always wanted to run my own business. I don't know why. I just had kind of had that idea in my head. And when I was in medical school, I started my first business actually, and that was a really small scale thing, but it was just successful. I ended up selling that business. And then when I was an intern, I tried to start another business. Not the best time to start a business. So that was the one with where I had the software but no sales. And um, my first uh, meeting with angel investors had to be rescheduled because of the 2011 terrorist attacks. And when that happened, there was no investing going on anywhere. Everybody was just stopped doing everything. And so I met with several angel investors, different cities around the country about that product line. And it just didn't go anywhere because it was bad timing. And then as I learned, and we talked about, you really need to have sales first for people to be interested. Because once they found out we didn't have sales, we had the software developed and it was pretty mature, but we didn't have sales. So anyway, those two things kind of killed that project. So regarding imposter syndrome, I never really had that at all. I think it might partly be due to my training as an engineer where, when you're an engineering major, you're presented with these problems. Sometimes they seem impossible when you first get them, and then you just keep working on it until you figure it out. And that was really good training, I think not only to run a business, but also just to be a physician, when you have a problem, you keep working on it until you find the solution to that problem. And that's kind of the mentality that I've had is, and also I just believe that, physicians and, obviously radiologists, physicians in general, you tend to be on the higher end of the intellectual scale, so to speak. So my expectation is that most physicians should be able to figure out, what they need to figure out to run a business. I don't think it's something that's so complicated that is beyond their ability or that they need an MBA or they need this, especially nowadays with information so readily available to you. And then with, LLMs making it even, more concise, being able to find answers to things. It's just not necessary to have a degree when you can find out the information and put it into practice yourself as a reasonably intelligent person.
Like, yeah, I think there's like no shortage of online MBAs and, business coaches and all these different resources that someone can use. But it's really encouraging to hear that. Sounds like, you were able to start a successful business without, getting an MBA or hiring up, going through some of these other routes.
Yeah, I don't think any of that's quite frankly, if you're willing to jump in and learn and make mistakes and fix your mistakes, then you don't need any of those degrees are not necessary to run a business. I mean, think about all the businesses of friends and family that you have. Then like my friends and family who have businesses, none of them have MBAs
Yeah.
and they all figured it out. Some of them don't even have college degrees running very successful businesses. And that's not necessary. It certainly might be helpful, but it's not necessary.
So in closing, can people contact you if they have any questions, and what would be the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, best way would be just via email. And just email me if you have any questions or if I can help in some way. Certainly willing to give advice or help in any way I can.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Shout out to Yuri Ishimchisen for our podcast music and to the RSNA podcast staff.
Email us at podcasts@rsna.org anytime with questions, feedback, or suggestions.